Appearances are often misleading, and the assumptions we make about others can sometimes lead us to unexpected and unforgettable lessons. This is a story that speaks to the dangers of arrogance and the humbling power of truth. It begins with a wealthy woman, one who believed her status and wealth placed her above everyone else. She carried herself with an air of superiority, treating those she deemed beneath her with little to no regard. But life has a way of turning the tables when we least expect it. One ordinary afternoon, in an upscale restaurant known for its refined menu and elite clientele, this woman entered, fully confident that the world revolved around her. She expected the finest service, the most luxurious experience, and unquestioning obedience from anyone who crossed her path. Her story, however, isn't just about entitlement. It's about how arrogance can blind us to the truth of the world around us. She thought she knew the game, who mattered, who didn't, and where the lines of power were drawn. She never questioned her assumptions. Now imagine sitting in a restaurant like this, the chandeliers overhead, the murmurs of conversation from diners, the clinking of glasses, all signs of elegance and affluence. You might feel important, powerful even, as though nothing could disrupt your sense of control. But what happens when the person you look down on, someone you belittle without a second thought, turns out to be the one in charge? This is not just a story of humiliation or embarrassment. It's a tale of reckoning, a moment where assumptions crumble and the truth steps into the spotlight. It's about learning the hard way that every person has a story and every individual is deserving of respect. Stay with me, because as this woman learns, the cost of her arrogance is far greater than she could have anticipated. This is the story of one act of prejudice and how it triggered a chain of events that changed everything. Step into the world of an upscale restaurant, known across the city for its impeccable service and luxurious atmosphere. This wasn't just a place to eat, it was where the elite gathered to celebrate, negotiate, and flaunt their status. The decor was refined, the ambiance hushed, and every detail spoke of sophistication. On a crisp afternoon, the sound of expensive heels clicking against the marble floors signaled the arrival of Victoria. She was the epitome of affluence, her designer outfit perfectly tailored, a statement handbag resting in the crook of her arm, and an air of superiority that followed her like a shadow. Victoria's presence alone seemed to demand attention, and as she stepped inside, heads turned. This was Victoria's domain. She was used to being treated with deference, and she expected nothing less here. Her sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the elegantly dressed patrons, the perfectly polished cutlery, and the poised waitstaff bustling about. Yet as she scanned the restaurant, her gaze settled on something, or rather someone, that disrupted her sense of perfection. A young waitress, dressed neatly in her uniform, approached with a bright and welcoming smile. Her name tag read Tiana, and her demeanor was warm and professional. But to Victoria, that wasn't what stood out. No, it was something much simpler, yet in Victoria's eyes it was glaringly out of place. Victoria's expression shifted into a look of disdain, her perfectly arched brow lifting slightly. Without waiting for Tiana to speak, she muttered under her breath, "Well, isn't this unexpected?" Tiana, unfazed by the tone, greeted her warmly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome. May I show you to your table?" she asked, her voice steady despite the subtle hostility directed her way. Victoria didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked Tiana up and down, her eyes lingering as though inspecting something unworthy. Finally, she let out a soft laugh, one devoid of humor. "You can't possibly work here," she said with a smirk. "This place is far too refined for someone like you." Tiana's smile wavered for the briefest moment, but she quickly recovered, maintaining her composure. "I assure you, ma'am, we pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards of service," she replied, her voice polite but firm. She gestured toward an elegant table near the window. "Right this way, please." Victoria followed, her steps measured and deliberate, as if each one was a declaration of her superiority. Seated at the table, she placed her handbag on the chair next to her, scanning the menu with a practiced indifference. But the moment Tiana walked away, Victoria leaned slightly toward the table next to hers and made a comment loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. I hope they don't let just anyone work here. Standards should be higher." The words hung in the air, cutting through the polite murmurs of the restaurant. Tiana, who was just within earshot, stiffened slightly but continued about her tasks. She had heard such remarks before, but this time was different. Little did Victoria know that the very person she was so quick to judge held a role in this restaurant that would soon leave her utterly speechless. Victoria sat back in her chair, oblivious to the attention her comment had garnered from a few nearby patrons. To her, it was just another day of asserting her perceived dominance. But what she couldn't see, what she would never have expected, was that Tiana's connection to this restaurant went far beyond what her uniform suggested. And the revelation that awaited would not just humble Victoria, it would change the way she saw the world. With Victoria seated comfortably, the scene seemed set for what she believed would be a flawless dining experience. However, her demeanor made it clear that she wasn't there to enjoy the meal. She was there to be catered to in a manner befitting her self-proclaimed importance. As Tiana approached with a water pitcher, Victoria immediately seized the opportunity to criticize. "Is this filtered water?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I can't imagine they serve just anything here." Tiana smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. Our water is filtered. Is there anything else I can bring you before you decide on your order?" Victoria scanned the menu with exaggerated displeasure. "Frankly, this menu is lacking. I expected more variety, something more upscale. Did no one think to offer a caviar option?" she quipped, raising her voice slightly, as though ensuring those nearby could hear her dissatisfaction. Tiana nodded gracefully. "Our chef selects the finest ingredients to ensure a menu that pleases a wide range of palates," she said evenly, refusing to let Victoria's condescension rattle her. But Victoria wasn't done. As Tiana began to walk away, Victoria added, "And please, make sure my food is served promptly. I'd hate to think the kitchen staff is as unpolished as the waitstaff." Her smirk was cutting, her words deliberately crafted to wound. Tiana paused for a moment, but instead of reacting, she turned and replied, "I'll make sure everything meets your expectations, ma'am." Her voice remained steady, her professionalism intact, though the weight of the insult lingered. As the meal progressed, the pattern continued. Victoria found fault in everything. The table settings were uninspired, the service was barely adequate, and when Tiana returned with the first course, Victoria scrutinized it as though she were a food critic at a high-stakes competition. "Is this what passes for fine dining here?" she asked with a laugh, glancing around as if to invite the other diners to join in her derision. "I expected better plating. You know, presentation matters, even for someone like you." The subtle jab at Tiana's appearance didn't go unnoticed. Other patrons exchanged glances, their murmurs growing louder as they began to piece together the dynamic unfolding before them. Tiana, however, refused to be drawn into the drama. She nodded, acknowledged Victoria's feedback with a polite, "I'll share your concerns with the chef," and continued her work. But the tension was undeniable. Tiana retreated to the back of the restaurant, where she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. This wasn't the first time she dealt with someone like Victoria, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Still, the constant barrage of insults had its impact. What Victoria didn't know was that Tiana wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had faced far greater challenges in life than the condescension of a wealthy patron. Tiana had worked tirelessly to reach this point, balancing long hours with her personal goals, and she took pride in her work. As she stood in the kitchen, she reminded herself of why she was here, not just for the job, but for the dream it represented. This restaurant wasn't just a place of employment, it was a cornerstone of something much bigger in her life. Meanwhile, out on the dining floor, Victoria continued to revel in her self-perceived superiority. She spoke loudly, her words filled with entitlement, as though she were the star of the show and everyone else mere supporting characters. The other diners, however, had grown less amused and more uncomfortable. Their whispers grew louder, their disapproval evident. Yet Victoria seemed blissfully unaware. As Tiana returned to the dining area, her resolve was unshaken. She approached Victoria's table with the grace and professionalism that had defined her every interaction. Victoria, of course, greeted her with another remark dripping with condescension. But what Victoria couldn't see, what no one at that table could see, was that the power dynamic she so clearly thought she controlled were about to shift dramatically. The true owner of the restaurant, the person who held all the cards, was about to be revealed. And Victoria was about to learn a lesson she would never forget. The air in the restaurant grew charged with anticipation when the front doors opened, and in walked a figure known and respected by everyone on staff. This was Jordan, owner of the acclaimed establishment, a self-made success story whose warmth and dedication had earned admiration far and wide. For the staff, Jordan wasn't just a boss, but a mentor who led by example. Jordan made their rounds, offering smiles and kind words to the staff and briefly chatting with a few regulars. As they approached the section where Victoria was seated, there was a noticeable shift in the room. Conversations quieted, and all eyes followed Jordan's path. Victoria, sitting at her table, noticed the attention, but didn't yet grasp what it meant. As Jordan reached Tiana, they greeted her with a warm smile. "Tiana," Jordan said, their voice full of affection and pride, "how's everything going today? You've been doing an incredible job as always. I couldn't be prouder." Victoria, who had been half watching the exchange with mild curiosity, suddenly sat up straighter. The way Jordan addressed Tiana wasn't casual. There was a familiarity and respect that Victoria couldn't ignore. Her smirk faded as confusion crept in. What exactly was happening here? "Thank you," Tiana responded with a smile, though her voice carried a modest humility. "I'm just doing my best to keep everything running smoothly." Victoria's expression hardened. "Running smoothly?" she interrupted, her tone sharp. "What do you mean? You're just a waitress." Jordan turned their attention to Victoria, their gaze calm but unwavering. "Actually," Jordan began, "Tiana isn't just a waitress. She's the manager of this restaurant. Everything you've enjoyed about this place, the service, the ambiance, the high standards, it's all because of her leadership." Victoria's face flushed as the weight of Jordan's words sank in. "The manager?" she stammered, her voice rising slightly. "But that's not possible. I mean, surely you're mistaken." Jordan didn't flinch. They crossed their arms and continued, "Not only is Tiana the manager, but she's also my daughter. This restaurant is her legacy as much as it is mine." The words hung in the air like a declaration. Victoria's jaw dropped, and for the first time, she was completely speechless. All her assumptions, her condescension, her cruel remarks, they all seemed so small now in the face of the truth. Victoria looked between Jordan and Tiana, her mind racing to process the revelation. "Your daughter?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan nodded, their expression firm. "Yes, and everything you've experienced here today, the atmosphere, the food, the exceptional service, was made possible by her hard work and dedication. I suggest you think carefully about how you've been treating her." Victoria swallowed hard, her earlier confidence evaporating. She glanced around, noticing the stares of other diners who had witnessed the exchange. The whispers, the glances, they were all directed at her now, her face burned with embarrassment. Jordan turned back to Tiana and said with a smile, "You've done an amazing job today, as always. Let me know if you need anything." With that, they walked away, leaving Victoria to grapple with her own actions. Victoria remained frozen in her seat, her mind a whirlwind of regret and disbelief. But as she looked at Tiana, who continued her work with quiet grace, she realized she wasn't out of the woods yet. Tiana's next move could very well determine how the rest of this encounter unfolded, and for the first time, Victoria was no longer sure she was in control. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, unable to speak. Her mind raced as the events of the afternoon replayed in her head. Every insult, every condescending remark, every dismissive gesture, it all hit her at once. She had belittled not just a waitress, but someone who was a cornerstone of the restaurant, the person responsible for its success. The other diners, still watching, murmured amongst themselves. It was clear they had witnessed everything. Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment, but the reality of her actions stung far more. She had spent the entire afternoon acting superior, yet now she felt incredibly small. Jordan wasn't done making a point. With calm authority, they turned to address the restaurant's patrons. This establishment has always been built on a foundation of respect, fairness, and equality. Jordan said, their voice carrying through the room. Every person on my team is essential to what we do here, and no one deserves to be treated as less than, especially not someone as talented and dedicated as Tiana. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the weight of the moment crushing. She had prided herself on her social standing, but it was evident that in this room, she was the one falling short. Finally, Victoria mustered the courage to speak. Her voice was low and unsteady. I didn't realize," she began, her tone tinged with regret. But Jordan wasn't ready to let her off the hook so easily. "Exactly," they replied, their gaze steady. "You didn't realize because you chose not to. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before judging someone based on appearances or treating them with such disrespect." Victoria's arrogance, which had fueled her behavior all afternoon, now seemed to crumble entirely. The haughty demeanor she carried was replaced by a rare vulnerability. She turned to Tiana, struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Tiana, ever composed, looked Victoria in the eye. For a moment there was silence. Then, with the same grace she had shown throughout the ordeal, she responded. "Thank you for your apology," Tiana said. "I hope this experience helps you see people differently in the future." The exchange left Victoria feeling humbled. She could see that Tiana's response was not just about accepting an apology. It was a subtle reminder of the strength and dignity Victoria had overlooked in her earlier assumptions. The room, which had been filled with tension moments earlier, began to shift. Diners murmured their approval of Tiana's composure, and a few even began clapping softly. The applause grew, a spontaneous show of support for Tiana and a silent rebuke of Victoria's earlier behavior. Victoria stood ready to leave, but the weight of her actions lingered. As she gathered her belongings, she glanced back at Tiana. There was no malice in Tiana's expression, only quiet strength, a final reminder of who truly held the power in this situation. Jordan smiled warmly at Tiana. "Keep up the amazing work," they said before walking away, leaving Victoria to exit the restaurant under the watchful eyes of everyone present. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like the outsider. Victoria stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face. She paused, taking a deep breath as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Her life had been one of privilege and entitlement, but this experience had shown her something she couldn't ignore. Inside the restaurant, Tiana returned to her work, greeted by words of encouragement and admiration from the other diners. But as Victoria walked away, one question lingered in her mind. Had she truly learned her lesson? Or would she revert to her old ways once the embarrassment faded? Only time would tell. This story is more than just an account of one person's arrogance. It's a lesson about the values that truly matter. In a world often preoccupied with appearances and status, it's easy to overlook the power of respect, humility, and kindness. Victoria's behavior that day wasn't just rude, it was a reflection of her assumptions that ultimately led to her own humiliation. How often do we judge others based on surface impressions? How quick are we to assume we know someone's worth based on their role, appearance, or circumstances? Victoria walked into that restaurant believing she was superior to everyone else in the room. She treated Tiana as if her job defined her value, failing to see the person behind the title. But Tiana, through her quiet strength and grace, reminded everyone present that dignity isn't tied to wealth or status. It's something earned through character, through how we carry ourselves even in the face of disrespect. Tiana's refusal to stoop to Victoria's level wasn't just professionalism. It was a display of true self-respect. She could have responded with anger or resentment, but instead she chose grace. And in doing so, she not only preserved her own dignity, but also delivered a powerful message to those watching. Victoria's story is not an isolated one. How many times have we witnessed or even participated in situations where someone is dismissed or treated poorly simply because of their position or perceived social standing? It's a stark reminder of how easily people can forget that everyone has a story, everyone has value, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Jordan's response added another layer to this lesson. As the owner, they could have easily dismissed the situation or handled it privately. Instead, they chose to use the moment to stand up for their team, to publicly affirm the values that made their restaurant successful in the first place. Their actions sent a clear message. In a truly respectful and inclusive environment, no one is overlooked and everyone's contributions are acknowledged. And as for Victoria, when she left the restaurant that day, she wasn't just leaving behind a meal. She was walking away from an experience that had shaken her sense of entitlement to its core. The once confident woman who had entered with her head held high now carried with her the weight of realization. Whether or not Victoria changed permanently, one thing is certain. She was given a moment to reflect, a chance to recognize that true worth isn't about what you own or how much you earn. It's about how you treat others. The story leaves us with a question we must all ask ourselves. In our everyday interactions, are we more like Victoria or Tiana? And if we find that we lean toward judgment and arrogance, are we willing to change? Because in the end, the legacy we leave behind isn't about our possessions or status. It's about the respect we show to others and the kindness we choose to extend, no matter the circumstances. Thank you for listening to this powerful story of respect and redemption. Every person we encounter has their own journey, shaped by experiences that we may never fully understand. What we see on the surface doesn't always tell the whole story, and it's essential to approach each other with empathy, understanding, and kindness. This story reminds us that even in the most difficult situations, there is always an opportunity for growth, change, and healing. Sometimes the greatest impact we can have is simply offering a moment of compassion or a listening ear. The difference we can make in someone's life is profound when we treat them with respect and dignity. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Together, we can create a world where kindness and understanding are at the heart of every interaction. And remember, treat everyone with kindness. You never know the story behind the person who's standing in front of you. What you offer may be the encouragement or support they need to keep moving forward.